Alrighty, everybody. So good afternoon. We're going to go ahead and get started. I'm sure you all know me at this point, but I'm Tyler Herman, co-coordinator for Louisiana Clean Fuels, along with Ann Vale. And today we're just going to talk a little bit about the annual report survey that we send out every year and kind of explain why we ask for what we do, um, how we actually kind of store that data and what happens with it, and then talk about the different ways that you can kind of give that fleet data to us. So it'll be a fairly short webinar. We'll definitely have time for some questions at the end so that we can maybe clear up any confusions that you have um, towards the end. So without further ado, we'll skip most of the introductory Clean Cities stuff that we just start with, but in case you're not aware, we're a Clean Cities Coalition, and they are close to 100 coalitions across the country. Around 80% of the US population is inside of a Clean Cities territory, so there is a ton of opportunity in case you have a fleet that spans multiple regions, to get involved with the Clean Cities Coalition. So we have our own territory, which is the majority of Louisiana, kind of excluding the New Orleans area. So we do have a sister coalition, and that's run by Courtney Young. So it's the Southeast Louisiana Clean Fuel Partnership. And we've been around since the year 2000 as a designated Clean Cities Coalition. This is our 20th anniversary, so we've kind of celebrating that all year. And another kind of important thing here is we're a nonprofit. We're independent nonprofit. We kind of stand alone. We're not trying to sell anything. And we are in partnership with the United States Department of Energy, as well as the Louisiana Department of Natural Resources. We kind of work under them under contract. And then we have tons of wonderful stakeholders like yourselves that we work with very closely to do the great work that we do. So jumping right in, what is the annual report? Why do we ask for this data? And what do we use it for? You see this great chart at the top. This directly comes from the survey that we do every year, and in the information that we collect that shows greenhouse gas emissions reduced year by year through our stakeholder efforts in our territory, of course, and then kind of breaks it down by what percentages from off-road vehicles, fuel economy improvements, vehicle mile reductions, and all that sort of stuff. And it gets a little bit more granular than just this chart, but this is kind of my favorite one to show off because it shows that we've really had some dramatic expansion over the years, which is just quite wonderful. And then crucially, the one thing I really love to point out is the fuel economy improvements is a huge portion. So it's kind of a free thing that fleets can do. It's just driver training to reduce their fuel economy, because every gallon not used it's free benefit without even having to buy alternative fuels. So that's one of the things that we really liked working with. The annual fleet survey it's absolutely crucial to tracking our success as a coalition. It really helps us understand exactly what's been effective, what efforts we should kind of spend our time on, and kind of redirect what we do every year. So every year we do kind of have a yearly goal set that we kind of strategize and figure exactly what we want to do during the next year. And the annual survey and annual report really feed into that and tell us kind of what's successful and what isn't successful, so we're not wasting our time and so that we're using our money more effectively, which is crucial as a nonprofit. It also just helps us understand the alternative fuel industry as a whole. It's really interesting to watch kind of how the different fuels kind of come into vogue and kind of have their heyday and which ones stick around for a long time. So it's really just good information for us to understand exactly what works and what doesn't work so that we can be nimble. We quantify the environmental benefits of all the sustainability efforts, greenhouse gases being a big one, but we also track the criteria pollutants like NOx emissions, particulate matter emissions, and those sorts of things that have very important effects on local health. So that's stuff's really, really important to track as well. And then the data, whenever fleets give it to us, is all totally confidential. We don't share any specifics with anybody. All we do is share a little bit of it with the Department of Energy, which is kind of a really important partnership because the Department of Energy funds a lot of grant programs that go directly towards making alternative fuels work better. They work with original equipment manufacturers, Ford and Cummins and all these big companies that make alternative fuel vehicles, and use some of this data to actually guide funding dollars to make these vehicles work better for the consumer. So we give some of this back to the Department of Energy, and I kind of show a little bit about what that looks like and how that goes. And it's a totally confidential thing. Outside of that, nobody else gets to see any of the data in particular. Everything is just shared in aggregate in charts such as the one that you see on the screen. So and that's really an important thing. We try to keep that as private as possible. And so the actual way that we kind of give this data to the Department of Energy, and this is actually a really good way that this is how we want to have it for ourselves anyway, because it's just kind of a good way to take it, is through an actual input portal online. And I've got a few slides of kind of what that looks like so that you understand exactly why we ask the questions that we do. And then later on in the presentation, we'll look at the actual survey that we send out and some of the other input methods that you can kind of give us your data with. So this is just for an alternative fuel vehicle data entry for just fleets who have the vehicles. Ask about the markets that they serve so we can understand if is this a municipal fleet, is this a private fleet. It's kind of just good to know who's kind of pioneering these fuels. The actual vehicle types, so that would be something like a dump truck or a pickup truck. And then we actually go down to like which fuel it is, how much fuel is used, number of vehicles. It's all pretty simple stuff. And so on the left, you see that that's if you happen to know the actual fleet data. So you have very specific numbers per vehicle on how much fuel they use. And the right is an estimate. So you can estimate the fuels. Obviously, the more accurate data, the better it is for kind of everybody. But we can estimate if needed by just looking at maybe it was a biofuel vehicle that uses both propane and gasoline or natural gas and gasoline, and you know that you happen to use it about 50% of the time, then we can kind of estimate through that. And then here we have what the entry looks like for off-road equipment. So, lawn mowers, forklifts, and so on. The question about the application, which is the drop-down menu I have pasted on the bottom left there. And then the fuel type is down on the bottom right. So we have all the different fuel types. We can add everything from hybrid electric diesel vehicles, which I know are not as popular these days, but did exist for quite a while. All the way down to stuff like renewable diesel that are really kind of coming into their own in recent years as the technology is getting better. And then it's the same sort of thing as the alternative fuel vehicle slide from before, that give us stuff fuel used, the number of vehicles, the amount of fuel per vehicle. Again, all this feeds back into us actually quantifying the emissions benefits of your efforts. Here we have idle reduction data entry, which this is probably the most complicated one that we track, because it's pretty difficult, I think, for fleets to have good numbers of how much idling they're reducing. But if that's available, we love to quantify that as well, because just like with the fuel economy improvements, if you're just not burning fuel, doing nothing, then that's a huge benefit, both monetarily for the fleet, where you're saving money by just not wasting fuel, but it's an entire gallon of gas or diesel not used. Those benefits it's one of the biggest benefits that you can possibly have when it comes to reducing your fuel usage, is just simply not burning it. So we ask for the average minutes of idling reduced per day. Some fleets know this number. Sometimes we use national averages based on the vehicle type and the application. The average days per year that the idling is reduced. And then if we happen to have the fuel saved per hour, then that's also very good as well. And again, we use a lot of national averages whenever the data is not quite available, but again, better data, better understanding of the landscape. And then we have the two drop-down menus kind of listed here as well for the type of vehicle on the left, and then the different technologies that people use for alternative fuel, for idle reduction techniques. So you have everything from just driver training. Some fleets just tell their drivers, hey, stop idling so much, please. And then they do that. Or something down to automatic engine shut off or auxiliary power units. And there are lots of technologies we try to capture as much as we can. And then we also have the vehicle mile travel reductions. So this is carpooling. This is route optimization through, a lot of fleets are now using stuff like all the buzzwords, AI and neural networks and all that sort of stuff to reduce the number of miles that you're traveling just by putting the right vehicle on the right route. And that can have some pretty substantial benefits as well. And so we track that as well. Although, the amount of granularity you can get there is pretty obscene. So we usually just kind of ask for the type of vehicle, the fuel economy, the number of vehicles, and then how many miles they're reducing. and that tends to kind of capture as much of the picture as we really realistically can. And again, these benefits are pretty huge because just simply not driving a mile is not burning the fuel that it takes to drive that mile. So it's not just alternative fuels that we deal with. It's a lot of these techniques that we like to call kind of low-hanging fruit. Just simply don't drive the mile and you don't burn the fuel associated with that. So that's probably the easiest way you can get the environmental and economic benefits associated with kind of all the stuff that we do. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about how we can participate in the survey and in our kind of annual report process. We have kind of 4 different ways to do it. We have an online survey. That's kind of the way that most fleets tend to use. And I'll show examples of how these actually look for the fleet in a minute. We have spreadsheets. I personally love spreadsheets. I think they're the easiest, but you know, some fleets use that, some don't. And then direct email, you know, that's more common for some of the simpler fleets. If you don't have too many vehicles, it might just be easier for you to email me directly and say, this year for our 15 trucks, we used 10,000 GGEs of natural gas. And you know, that's all it takes for those sort of situations. But a lot of fleets are more complicated than that. So direct email can be a little bit clunky. And then we also have our green fleets participation. So I'm going to talk a little bit about green fleets in a couple minutes, but this is an alternative way to give us your information. And it's only every 3 years that we ask for green fleets data. So this won't work every year, but it is a bit of a more kind of holistic data set that I'll talk a little bit about in a minute. And then we can just use that for annual report data so that we're not asking you for the same thing twice in the same year. So the online survey, I just took a couple of screenshots of what the survey looks like, and we can do a live demo if y'all would like to look at the actual survey and kind of go through a little bit of it, as well as the spreadsheet. But it's simple enough. This is just a section about alternative fuel vehicles, and you know, ask for same stuff that we're seeing on our actual data entry. Is what is the vehicle type? What is the fuel type? How many of this type of vehicle do you have in your fleet? What market are they, and in the vehicle type itself. And then we just ask for the actual types of fuel used. Crucially, you know, one of the parts that's a little more difficult is we really need to know what the unit you're using is. So some fleets measure their natural gas usage in diesel gallon equivalents. Some measure it in gasoline gallon equivalents. Some measure it in SCFM, or SCF rather, or BTU. Like, there are so many ways to measure it. So we really do ask that if you can, please give us the unit that you work with, and we'll happily do the conversion as needed to kind of make it usable for us. And then we also have the availability to estimate how many miles driven and the fuel economies and that sort of stuff as well. So the survey is a little bit longer, but you don't have to go through every question. If you say no to certain questions, it opts you out of the next kind of tree of questions. So it shouldn't take too terribly long to fill out. And we kind of clean it up and make it better every year. We have Excel spreadsheets that we have a template of on our website, and we can send it directly if you can't find it there. I've got the date wrong with December 2020, it should say. But it's the same sort of thing. I find this the easiest personally to input data. It's just really easy to go through the thing and kind of type everything in. But again, it's the exact same sorts of questions. So we're not really asking for anything different. And then another example of Excel spreadsheets for idle reduction. And again, all these questions are exactly the same questions that we have internally whenever we actually input our data kind of online into our database. And then the green fleets option is Excel spreadsheet, again, because spreadsheets are wonderful. And to talk just a little bit about this, green fleets data is a little bit more holistic than the alternative fuel data that we ask for our annual report. The annual report only looks at alternative fuel vehicle usage and fuel reduction techniques like VMT reductions and idle reduction and that sort of stuff. But the green fleets actually looks at your entire fleet, so your non-alternative fuel vehicles as well, gasoline and diesel vehicles. And the goal of it is to really look at your entire fleet and kind of assign a point value to it in a sense, and say, okay, well, how much is this work that you're doing actually translating to the reductions that you're kind of hoping to get environmentally. And in kind of the scoring system, we have a whole website on it, so I won't talk too much about it here. but we do ask for the diesel and gasoline vehicle as well. So it is a little bit more legwork on the side of the fleet to give us this data, because it includes alternative fuels and conventional fuels. But it is a 3-year enrollment. So once you get certified, you don't have to get certified again until 3 years elapses. And we also track with the annual report data if a fleet changes, if their values change too much before that 3 years is up, we'll ask again for green fleets data. Most of the time, this will be because fleets have more alternative fuels, and we think, hey, I think maybe you would be a 2-star fleet, or as opposed to a 1-star fleet, because your data has gotten better. So this is just a different option for any fleet who's not enrolled in the Green Fleets program and wants to participate. I just want to make sure I give this as an option, so we're not asking for data twice. And then the Green Fleets program, just a tiny bit more about it. It's a statewide program now. It used to be an LCF only program, but now we've partnered with our sister coalition, the Southeast Louisiana Clean Fuel Partnership in New Orleans, to make it a statewide program under a single umbrella, so that you don't have to split your data between New Orleans and our coalition, because we know that your fleets, they don't have the same boundaries we do. That wouldn't make any sense. So we want to make it statewide and kind of make the value better for everybody. Have the fleets who are already certified here on the screen, so you can see their star level. And we do have some benefits associated with enrolling. So on top of just getting the recognition on our website, and we'll do a press release and actually do the award ceremony whenever you do become certified, we also provide a large, like a package of social media templates and press release templates, so that you can kind of brag about your fleet on social media and online, and kind of brag about the great work that you've done. But we also hand a report back to the fleet and say, look, here's all the reductions from your fleet. Here's kind of where you got the most reductions. Maybe if you have some older vehicles that are still driving diesel or something, and we see that maybe you can shift some vehicles around and increase your point that you're getting, or increase your benefits, then we actually give kind of actionable recommendations on how you can make your fleet better, both to save money and reduce emissions, the whole goal of LCF as a whole. So we provide a whole report back to the fleet, the templates for all the social media and outreach and press release stuff, as well as just talking about you in our events and on our website. So I think it's a pretty good mutualistic benefit that we get between us and the fleets. We really like quantifying all the emissions on a fleet by fleet basis and say, like, here are all of your emissions associated with your work, and here's how much you're reducing compared to a fully conventional fleet. If your alternative fuel vehicles were running on diesel and gasoline instead, we tell you what that would look like. So you can kind of see the very direct benefits of all the work that you've done. Oh, and to mention, it's a 5-star scale, and we've designed it in such a way that even having 1 star is actually really quite impressive. We don't want it to be a super low barrier to entry. We want it to, like, this is actually doing good work. So even if you're 1 star, like, that's something to be proud of. And I think that's a good way to design it. So do we have any questions? I don't know. And do they have availability to put the mic on, or they just want to type it into the chat? And we can also do a live demo. I can show you the actual input process, both on the survey and on our kind of internal annual report process as well.
I believe I can turn their mics on if they raise their hand. So if y'all look at the kind of the nav box at the bottom where there's participants chat screen, you should be able to raise your hand with any questions, or you can type it into the chat, either way, and we will answer them.
I don't think we're saying anything particularly groundbreaking here. Maybe y'all already knew this, but we wanted to just give an opportunity to just be very clear about exactly what we're asking for, why we're asking for it. And this webinar is going to be recorded, so if you have somebody else on your team that you want to share it with, they can see it, or any fleets who didn't manage to make it today can watch.
So Tyler, when can people start submitting data, and what is the deadline to get data into us?
Yes, thank you. That's a great question. So this is annual, so we want data from January 1st to December 31st. So the enrollment or data submission starts on January 1st of next year, so 2021, for the 2020 annual report. And then the enrollment period, or the enrollment if you're doing Green Fleets, submission period if you're doing annual report on its own, ends on March 1st. So first 2 months of the year is when we ask for this data.
So Tyler, when will the link to the new 2020 survey be up, and when will we be able to publish and post the link to the spreadsheet as well? Because they're currently not
Yeah,
up.
so we should have all that available. It really should be available next week.
Awesome.
Sorry, you're breaking up on my end, so I apologize if I talked over you. But yeah, the survey and everything will be available on the website. Should be available next week. But again, the enrollment or the submission kind of starts at the beginning of the year so that you can still capture all the miles traveled and such towards the end of December.
And how does this data contribute to the annual Clean Fuel Leader Awards that is hosted every October or every fall?
Yeah, so the annual report is the primary way that fleets give us their data and that we know what fleets are doing. So that's the only way that we can really include any fleet in our annual Clean Fuel Leader Awards that we do every year. And that again is kind of similar to green fleets. There's a lot of press around that we do a bunch of bumping our fleets who are included in the annual Clean Fuel Leader Awards. So that's the only way to participate in that is with annual report data. And then we do a big award thing every year based on that.
Fantastic. And there's another reason why getting all this data is so important this year is because the governor has a climate task force and they're trying to do a whole greenhouse gas inventory update. So understanding the full landscape of everyone who is using alternative fuels and the different ways that we can reduce emissions and the most effective ways to reduce emissions is going to be very critical. And this data that we're going to be collecting will be it'll be all in just in time for the state to conduct this analysis, and we can contribute this data so that they have an accurate understanding of where we're all starting so that we can better get to that end goal of reducing our state's emissions. I think we want to be net zero by 2050 is the state's new goal.
And we want to make this process as easy as possible. If there's any recommendations that anybody has or feedback on the annual report process and the survey process, please tell us. Sometimes it's hard for us to know exactly how a fleet operates and might be to get this data the best. So anything that any of you have seen in the past, see most people and the attendees have participated. But if you have any recommendations on how we can make it better, please tell us, because we want to make it as easy as possible for everybody involved.
I think the last question would be.
So without any questions, I believe that wraps it up.
Yeah, the last question would be fueling stations and how do we collect data, ensure that we are not double reporting on a fleet that may be utilizing fuel from a fueling station, but wanted to be able to capture the fuel usage of fleets that may not actually directly be reporting. So what would you tell a fueling station operator?
Yeah, so usually whenever we talk to fueling operators, that is included in the survey questions, but where you fuel or who fuels at the stations, so that we can make sure that we're not double counting. But that often happens in a discussion kind of after we get the data, like, hey, where'd you fuel? So that we're not double counting. Usually, most of our data comes from fleets directly, so it doesn't come from the fueling stations as much. But if it does, usually it's pretty easy to figure out exactly who's fueling how much there, sort of in the same way. Or at the very least, we're able to take it away from the fleet side, because the fleets will tell us we fueled at this station. That's usually something that the fleets have for us. And it would just take that away from the actual fueling station's data. The fueling stations aren't sharing data about fleets that are fueling there, is what I'm trying to say. So that would come from the fleets themselves.
Fantastic. Thank you. I don't believe we have any more questions.
Excellent. With that, thank you all for participating. I'm sure you'll probably get emails about the annual report as that enrollment period and submission period begins. So thank you all so much, and hope you all have a good day.